So yes, welcome to this webinar all about wicking boxes. My name's Aaron. I work for the City of Mount Gambier. I'm the Environmental Sustainability Officer. So I do all sorts of things environmental, from active transport to waste and recycling, but also local food. And that's why we've got this webinar all about wicking boxes. I first heard about wicking boxes probably 7 or 8 years ago, and I've been doing it ever since. Tried lots of different ways, different materials and things, had failures along the way, also successes. So hopefully in this webinar, you'll be able to skip the failures and go straight to success. So what are we going to cover tonight? Well, firstly, if you do have any questions as we go along, please use the quick Q&A function and I'll answer what I can at the end. And so we're going to cover what is a wicking box, what's the big deal about wicking boxes, why are we here, why are we doing a webinar on it, what are the basic principles of wicking boxes, how do they work, are they suited to Mount Gambier and similar climates, how to make a wicking box, so we'll go through that, and also what works and what doesn't. So firstly, the obvious question, what is a wicking box? So a wicking box is a self-watering planter box. By self-watering, I don't mean that it's some kind of magic box that sucks the water out of the air and you never have to put any water into it. Basically, it's a planter box that, as I explained, waters itself through a reservoir down the bottom. So the plants are watered from below rather than above. So obviously every other box you have to water it from above. In a wicking box, it actually gets its water from below. So there's a reservoir section in the bottom third of the box, because in a conventional planter box or pot, the outlet hole is right down at the bottom. So obviously it lets all the water out. In a wicking box or a wicking pot, it's a third of the way up from the bottom. So obviously that bottom section has water in it whenever you put water into the wicking box. Then you have some kind of connection between that layer that has all the water in it, the reservoir section, to the soil section above. So that's your wick. And how it works is it works by capillary action. So as you can see in this image with the dish and the paper towel, when you have a water or other liquid in a dish, dip the paper towel in, the water kind of soaks up or uses capillary action to go up into the paper towel. Same kind of thing that works in a wicking box. So you've got your water down below, you've got your wicks that connect water to the soil layer above, and the water wicks up through into the soil and keeps it moist. So it doesn't keep it wet. The only wet part is the bit in the reservoir down the bottom, but it keeps the soil moisture just at a good level for the plants. So this image also demonstrates sort of simply what a wicking box is. You've got your inlet pipe where you put the water in. You've got the section down the bottom, which is the water section or the reservoir. And then you have an outlet pipe or overflow where the water obviously comes out when it's full. Then you have some kind of connection between the water layer and the soil layer above, which is a wicking column. So that's made out of different materials, which I'll talk about later. Basically, it's a column of soil that's in some kind of container, so it doesn't all just spread out into the water and the reservoir. Some kind of container with the soil in it, and then that connects the reservoir layer into the soil layer above, and that's how the water wicks up there to the roots of the plants through the soil. Why wicking boxes? So what's the big deal? Well, they require less watering, particularly in summer, which is great for busy people, and I'll explain a bit about that in a moment. They're much more forgiving than ordinary planter boxes because you don't have to water them as much. You don't have to go out into the garden every day and water. If you've filled up the reservoir, then that can stay full or have water in it for more than a week. Provides a consistent level of moisture to the plant roots. So when we're watering, if we're busy, often we'll just sort of give a bit of a light spray over different parts of the garden, and we're not really giving the plants enough water. So really we're just wetting the surface and it's not soaking down to where the roots are. With a wicking box, because the moisture is coming from below through the soil, it delivers the right amount of moisture to the plants. Also, the roots of plants can grow down further if they need to. They can even sometimes get into the reservoir zone through those wicks, through those columns of soil if they need more water. And just to give a little anecdote, last summer in Mount Gambier, we had I think it was almost a record hot day, 45, 46 degrees, hot northerly winds. I was at work that day, and where I live, we use groundwater for the garden, or bore water, but it's got iron in it. So we can't use any kind of automatic watering system because it just clogs up with the iron that's in the water. So we have to water by hand. But anyway, on that day I was at work, so I wasn't there to water the garden. And when I got home, I expected everything to be dead because it was such a hot day, and most of the garden was dead, apart from a few odd plants. But the plants in the wicking boxes, particularly larger wicking boxes, were almost unaffected. It was amazing. So 45-degree day, I thought, well, you know, in the wicking boxes, I thought they'll probably survive, but they'll be quite stressed, not looking great. Got home, but they were almost unaffected. So on those really hot days in summer, wicking boxes are fantastic, particularly if you're busy and you don't get out into the garden as much as you'd like. They're absolutely fantastic for that. They suit most veggies, flowers, herbs, kind of those, you know, those plants, smaller plants. So you can grow some larger ones if you build a bigger version. Roots generally go down about a foot or so. So you can grow all those kind of, most of your mainstream veggies, herbs and flowers and things like that. They're much more water efficient because you're not spraying water where it's not needed. You just put it in through the pipe, goes into the reservoir, and then it soaks up through the soil to where the roots are. Generally, they're also raised because it's a box that's raised higher than ground level, so that's good for your back. There's less surface watering because you don't have to water on the surface. You're not germinating those weed seeds that are in the soil, so you get less weeds as well, which is fantastic because no gardener likes weeds. Are wicking boxes suited to Mount Gambier? Well, yes, definitely. So they're suited to all sorts of climates, really, and they're definitely suited to Mount Gambier. We get hot and dry summer weather in summer, and we'll get weeks without rain. Also, can be quite hot, and so they're ideal for that. Absolutely ideal for all year, but particularly in summer. But even in winter here in Mount Gambier, sometimes we just get light rains and it just wets the surface of the soil and doesn't actually soak down to where the roots of the plants are. So that's that image on the right hand side there. It just shows that that's probably after a rain or someone's been watering. The surface looks wet, but when you scratch underneath, it's actually still dry. So even in winter, we sometimes don't get enough rain really, and we should be making sure that our plants have the water right down at their roots. So how do you make wicking boxes? What do you need? What materials? Obviously you need a container that holds water. So not one that's got a hole right down at the bottom, or if it does have a hole right down the bottom, then plug that up with some sealant or something like that. It can be any kind of container that holds water really, from very small, like an ice cream container, through to a large container, like the one in the image there, an IBC that you see a lot around the place. You need some kind of pipe to fill the reservoir layer. So it could be anything. Could be a plastic pipe, metal pipe, could be an old vacuum cleaner tube. You need some material to fill the reservoir section. So obviously you've got soil in the upper layer, that's going to be very heavy. If you don't have something to stop, that sort of collapsing into the reservoir layer, then, it's not really going to work. So you need something in there. So you either need some very, very strong layer, like plastic layer, but typically what you do though is you fill it with, say, crushed rocks or scoria or things like that, where the water can easily fill up the reservoir and there's lots of gaps between the rocks and the scoria, and then that supports the weight of all the soil on top. You need something to stop the soil getting down from the soil layer into the reservoir layer, into the water layer. So that can be things like shade cloth, weed matting, geofabric, even old clothes. So something to stop the soil getting down into there, but it still allows moisture to go through. So if you get rain or you do water from the top, even you can get some going through, obviously, from the reservoir layer through to the soil layer. But something to stop the reservoir layer filling up with the soil, because that will make it less efficient. You also need wick holders. So what I mean by that is a bit of pipe or a plastic bottle with holes drilled in it. You put the soil into that goes into the reservoir layer, but it also protrudes into the soil layer. And that's your wick, that's your connection from the water in the reservoir through to the soil. You need a fine kind of soil, but not sand. So you don't want sand, that won't work very well. And you also don't want soil that's got big clumps, that's going to have big gaps in between it, because the soil obviously needs to be fairly fine for that capillary action to work. So it needs to be fine, but not sand. And I'll talk about that in a moment. And you need an outlet pipe or hole. So how to make wicking boxes. Firstly, you obviously have your container, your box, or whatever it might be. You drill your hole 1/3 of the way up from the bottom of the box. So you obviously measure how tall it is, where's 1/3, and drill your hole there. So that's where you want your outlet, so that you've got your water in that bottom third. If you want to use an outlet pipe, you don't have to, you can just have a hole, but outlet pipe just makes it a bit neater. You can install that 1/3 of the way up from the bottom. Then you make your wicks. So you might have some pipe, plastic bottles, whatever it may be. You want to make it taller than the reservoir section. So that bottom third, you want to make your wick taller than that so it protrudes into the soil zone. And so you've got that connection there. You need to drill some holes into that so the water can get, into that wick, into that container. So for, say, like a polystyrene box, you'd want, sorry, that's a typo there, 33. It should be 3 times 600 ml bottles. So for a polystyrene box, 3, you get 600 plastic bottle, 600 milliliter plastic bottles, 3 of those, and that will do the job. So you then fill the wicks with soil. So sieved compost works really good, or potting mix. Can be soil from your garden as long as it's not too sandy. Put the wicks in the bottom of the box, and then you get your pipe that you're going to use for filling it up, and drill some holes in the bottom third of that too, where the reservoir layer is, so that the water can get out very quickly and easily. If you don't drill holes in it, then it might get flush with the bottom of the box, and then your water won't go through. Easy fix for that is obviously the holes, or you could just, if it ever does that, you just sort of pull the pipe up just a tiny bit, and then that should pull it up from the bottom of the box, and then your water should flow out too. You put your fill material in, so whether it's rocks or scoria or other kinds of recyclables, generally what you've got around, and you put it around the wick and the pipe, and fill that material up to just over the outlet hole. I should mention too, this webinar is being recorded, so if I am going through it fairly quickly, but it's being recorded, so you will be able to refer back to it later on. So you put your barrier material on top of the scoria or the rocks or whatever you've put down in the reservoir section. And you cut some holes in it above the wicks, and then ensure that the wicks sort of protrude through that barrier layer. So then you're ensuring that there's that connection from the reservoir through to the soil. The material also should go slightly up the sides of the box. So when you're cutting it to size for it to fit your box, just make it a little bit bigger so it goes slightly up the sides, and that will just help stop the soil from going down into the reservoir layer. Then you fill it up with your soil and fill it to the brim, because as it settles in and as you water it to get it started, the soil will settle down a bit. So you can fill it right up to the brim, and then you'll notice that the soil layer will decrease a little bit. Fill it up with water until it flows out the outlet, and then give it a bit of a water from above just to kickstart the process and also settle the soil down. And then you're good to plant it out. So get your seedlings or your seeds and plant it out. Generally, you only need to fill the reservoir once a week or even less. That is affected by obviously the size of the box. If you've just got a little ice cream container, then you're probably going to do it more than that. If you've got a larger box, you might do it less often. Also depends on the amount of plants you've got in there and what size they are. Obviously, the bigger they are, they'll use up more water, and also the weather as well. So obviously this time of year in winter, there's not that heat stress on your garden, but in summer, you're going to need to fill it up more often. But if you've got a large wicking box, generally once a week or so should be enough, but you can just keep an eye on it, particularly through your outlet pipe. So what doesn't work? So I mentioned I've had a few failures over the years, and one of those is to use flexible plastic. So it's things like builder's plastic. I've also used kind of the plastic you get around appliances, or even you get around mattresses. And I've used that in different boxes over the years. And it doesn't last for very long. So you might get 2 years, if you're lucky, 3 or 4 years out of it. The picture there is one of the boxes that I made a while ago, and I made it out of untreated timber. So not only is the timber eventually rotted and broken, as you can see that sort of hole down the bottom, but also the plastic inside. So I've used some kind of thin plastic in there, probably from the plastic that was wrapped around the mattress or something. It doesn't last that long. So you can go to that effort of building a wicking box, but then 2-3 years later, you're going to have to do it all again, or it turns into a conventional planter box then, and so you don't get the benefits of the wicking box. So that kind of thin plastic, I don't recommend you use that because it won't last very long. These are another couple of boxes, similar kind of design that I made. The one on the left there was, again, untreated timber. I had that sitting on the ground. So the timber underneath that was in contact with the ground stayed moist just from the weather, not so well. Eventually the plastic broke and leaked out as well, but it was just sitting on the ground. So that wood rotted quite quickly. So I recommend that if you're going to do that, have your planter box just a little bit off the ground so that the bottom part doesn't stay saturated and rot quickly, particularly if you're using untreated timber. The one on the right, the black plastic, is kind of a bit of a thicker plastic, and it probably did last a little bit longer, but you can see under that outlet pipe there still is a hole, there's a tear, and it still didn't last that long. So you want to use something that's more solid, which I'll talk about in a moment, rather than thin plastic to hold the water in. Another mistake that I see is people don't have wicks, so they don't have that join from the reservoir layer into the soil layer. So that design on the left there, the kind of yellow one, you'll see the design's there, but it's missing the wicks. Those blue arrows, they're just trying to indicate that the water goes up. They're not actual wicks or part of the design. What happens there is when the water level is filled to the brim, you'll have a connection. The water, because it will touch the barrier layer and touch the soil, and you get transfer of water there. But once the water goes below maximum, the connection is lost between the water and the soil above, because there is no connection. You might get some plants that their roots will grow long and they might even find their way through that barrier, depending what it's made of, and they might get some moisture from that. But generally, you want to really have wicks in your reservoir layer through to your soil layer. So that's the one on the right where it says wicking column. That one there would have soil in that wicking column, goes from the reservoir through up into the soil layer. So you've got your wick, got your connection there. So make sure you have that connection. You can use almost anything that will hold water. So plastic boxes, pots, even ice cream containers, milk, plastic bottles. IBCs are fantastic. So that's the things that are shown in the pictures there. They're really good because they're quite a large size. So, when you fill the reservoirs up in those, they'll last for a while and you won't have to bother about watering those plants. The one with the price on it there is, I saw on for sale at a local hardware shop just recently. That one there would be brand new, never been used. That's why it's reasonably expensive. You can get them much cheaper, particularly secondhand. You can get them a lot cheaper. Sometimes you can even get them for free. But you want to make sure that they haven't had toxic chemicals in them. So obviously you don't want to be growing in them if they've had toxic chemicals in them. So if you are getting them secondhand, then just ask what they've been used for. But if they haven't been used for that and they're good to go, then they're absolutely fantastic. And you, out of one IBC, you obviously cut it in half and you can get 2 wicking boxes out of it. This is another one. This is a simple plastic box, 100 litres. That's a reasonable size wicking box. Perfect. All you have to do is drill in your hole, third of the way up from the bottom, and then fill up the different materials like I mentioned before. And you can grow, that's a handy little garden box, that 100 litres. You can often get those kind of boxes cheap as well when they're on special and from different places. So that's just showing the outlet pipe. As I mentioned, you don't actually have to have a pipe. You can just have a hole, but the pipe just makes it a bit neater. Another good one is old vacuum cleaner pipes and hoses. So you have the metal pipe from, the vacuum cleaner from the pipe bit that you use to hold onto when you're vacuuming around. Plus you also get the long plastic tube. What you can do with the plastic tube is leave it attached to the pipe. You run that in the bottom in the reservoir layer and drill some holes in it. And then you fill it up with your scoria or your crushed rock, whatever you're putting in your reservoir layer. What that does is it just means it fills up a lot quicker because you obviously fill up through the pipe and then it goes through the flexible plastic pipe, and because you've drilled the holes in it, just gets into the reservoir layer much quicker. So you fill it up a lot quicker, so saves you time. Polystyrene boxes, they work really well too. Very easy to work with, very easy to put the outlet hole in and the like, and they're you can grow, a few lettuces and other kinds of things in those boxes. And generally there's a lot of them around. They're fairly easy to find. This is kind of showing this one. This is the most simple form of a wicking pot. These ones are obviously made out of old milk cartons, 3-litre plastic milk cartons. What I've done here is I haven't actually put in a pipe or even filled the reservoir layer with scoria or anything. I've just filled the whole thing up with soil. But on that picture on the left, you can see there's a little dark dot in a sort of a stream of dark liquid coming out of it. So I've put the outlet hole a third of the way up, and then I've just filled it up with soil. And so that's the most simple form of wicking pot. So it's kind of like a conventional pot, but instead of the whole net being down the bottom and all the water draining out, you're keeping water in that bottom third, which keeps it all moist. So not wet except for that bottom third, but moist. And that will help with the veggies, the moisture levels. It's not as efficient because it doesn't have a pipe, so you can't fill the reservoir up directly. It's just through surface watering. Also, the reservoir layer is just got soil in it, so it doesn't hold as much water as it would if it had scoria in there or something like that, that has larger particles, larger gaps between them, so you can fit more water in. But it's a very simple way of just ensuring that you're giving your plants a better chance at survival. So this kind of pot will do better in summer than a conventional pot that's got the water, the hole right down the bottom. Just a note about soil. So as I mentioned, don't use sand or soil with large clumps or particles. So you want to use kind of a finer soil so the water can wick up through it. And a good idea is to sieve your compost. This larger picture here is just what I've got at home, which is a simple timber frame with some chicken wire on it. And you just throw your compost onto it with your spade. You know, you sort of move it around the surface of the wire with your spade, give it a tap, and all the finer compost will fall through onto the ground. The larger material just stays in there, and then you can either throw that back into your compost or you could just dig it into your garden. But that gives you that kind of finer soil to use for your wicking boxes. Gardening Australia have a good video about making a wicking box out of an IBC. So Sophie's got a kind of a 5-minute video in there. So it's, if you go to the Gardening Australia website, if you look for Wicking Works, search for that, you'll find it, or the whole URL is there. If you want to go back when this is recorded, you can go back and have a look at it. But if you go Gardening Australia, search for Wicking Works, you should find it. Just a note, she doesn't actually use any wicks in her video. So, you know, it will work, I guess, particularly if the plant roots go right down to where the reservoir layer is, but it would work much better if it had wicks in it. So you can follow what she does, but just make sure to put some wicks in as well. So in an IBC, depending on how thick they are, you probably want, say, 3 or 4 20-centimeter wide wicks going from the reservoir layer up into the soil layer. This is just a useful thing for people who do veggie gardening. It's the Mount Gambier planting calendar. It's on the City of Mount Gambier website under Sustainability, Food and Garden. Just shows you kind of the major types of vegetables that people grow and also when to grow them. So it's got the veggies on the left, the month of the year on the top. And so you can look up the month and see what I can grow. So June, we're the middle, you know, just starting winter, can't grow as much as you can in spring. You still can grow things like lettuce and other things, but you know, it really kicks off once the weather starts to warm up again. But I recommend, if you don't have that, go on the website and have a look. Also for gardeners, City of Mount Gambier has a program through the Compost Revolution where you can get half-priced composting gear, so tumblers, bins, worm farms, bokashi bins, etc. So to do that, you go to the Compost Revolution website, .com.au/Mount Gambier, and then you can get your half-price composting gear for residents of Mount Gambier. So if you live outside of Mount Gambier, then you'll have to check with your local council to see if they do that or not. Gardening Australia has a veggie guide on there, which has lots of good information. So that's a good source of information for growing veggies if you want to find out more. They've also got the show that they have that you can watch on ABC iView. So in summary, Wicking Boxes, fantastic way to grow veggies and other plants. They make growing veggies a lot easier, particularly for busy people who don't have time to go out and water every day, particularly in summer. They're pretty easy to make. You can make them, as I say, from a small ice cream container right up to IBC or even larger. You can make them on whole garden bed scale if you want to, called wicking beds. You might see people talk about that. That's on it's kind of a garden bed scale. But yeah, just go out and get started. So hopefully these tips will help you have some success. The webinar is being recorded, so you can refer back to it if you want to. It'll be on the City of Mount Gambier YouTube page in the near future. If you do have any questions, then yeah, please use the Q&A and I'll try and answer them now. And just a shout out that we've got another webinar in a fortnight on the 17th of June on recycling. So a lot of people ask me about different things. Can I recycle this? Can I recycle that? And so if you come along to this webinar, you'll find out all about all sorts of things that perhaps you didn't know you could recycle or how to recycle them. There'll be more details on the Mount Gambier Library Facebook page soon about that one, but it'll be in a fortnight's time on the 17th of June. So yeah, if you have any questions, then please ask them through the Q&A function and I'll do my best to answer them. Someone's asked have I tried them in a hot climate? Well, no, I haven't, because I've just tried them where I've lived, and I've always lived in a climate similar to Mount Gambier. So I think they would be, but you'd have to ask someone who lives in a hot climate. What is the best ratio of wicks to garden area? So it depends on the size. As if you work on, say, I mentioned before, like one of those ordinary polystyrene boxes, you had 3 wicks in there, sort of the 600 ml plastic bottle kind of size. That's the kind of ratio that you want of wicks to your soil. Can you use a pond liner is a question. Yes, you definitely could use a pond liner, and if you're doing it on a garden bed scale, you'd have to use something like a pond liner. I wouldn't use the soft plastic or what I talked about, but that can be quite expensive. If you can get that cheap, fantastic, but if you have to buy it new, then pond liner can get quite expensive pretty quickly. Another question, how well or poorly does potting mix perform for these purposes? Potting mix is fine, so that will work well, because that's just kind of a finer soil, so you can use potting mix. Can you use treated timber for vegetable boxes? Will it hold the water that is needed? I wouldn't use treated timber for a vegetable box, because they are treated with chemicals, so I just wouldn't use that. If you're going to make a timber box out of untreated timber, then you obviously need to line it with something. So you can line it, the rubber or pond liner would be better, because it's going to be much more durable than that kind of builder's plastic or something like that. Do you find that seeds or small seedlings get enough water being so close up to the top of the box? Yeah, so with seeds particularly, but also small seedlings, you will still need to water from above for a little bit. So you'll need to water them until they get large enough that their roots can get down to the soil that's moist from the wicking box layer, from the reservoir layer. So yeah, so seeds and small seedlings, you do still have to water them from the top until they get a bit bigger. Can you just go back over the wick? What can be used and what can we do with it? So for the wick, you basically just need a container that's going to hold soil, and then you fill it with soil basically. So it can be a plastic pipe. So if you had some PVC pipe or something like that, you just need to drill holes in it, small holes. Also plastic bottles will work, and it just has to go, you have to make sure that it goes above the top of the reservoir layer into the soil layer, so that there is that connection there. Is there any chance we can get a copy of the slides? Well, this is being recorded, so it will go on the City of Mount Gambier YouTube page in the near future, and all the slides are on there, so you can go back and have a look over it. Another one, what can you line a wine barrel or treated timber with to make it waterproof? So you'd have to have like the rubber pond kind of liner or something like that in order to make it waterproof. Or if you could find some other container that fitted inside it, like sometimes you can get those plastic barrels and things, they would work well, those plastic drums, if you cut them in half and put them inside of the wine barrel, perhaps if it's the right size. But even on their own, they would work well as a wicking box, a wicking pot. Just having a look at the questions here. What do you actually use to line the box that doesn't break down? If you're doing it from the box, you use a rubber pond liner. Another one, what about builder's plastic for a liner? Well, I don't recommend that because it doesn't last very long. So it will, you might get 2 years out of it, maybe 3 if you're lucky, but it won't last for that long. So, I mean, if you just want a box that's going to work for 2 or 3 years, fine. But if you want it to last longer than that, then I wouldn't use builder's plastic because it will break down. Another one, I've heard wicking boxes can cause plants to get soggy roots and root rot. If you have you have to remember the ratios of the thirds. So down the bottom third is the reservoir, and the top 2/3 is your soil. So if you follow those ratios, then they shouldn't get soggy roots. If you know of a plant that's, I wouldn't probably grow cactus or something like that in a wicking box because they like drier soil. But generally with veggies and things like that, they're fine. Another question, how does the soil not come out of the wicks? Well, if you just have fine holes in it, so you don't have large holes out of the wicks. Also, what you can do is that kind of material layer that you put on top of the reservoir underneath the soil to stop the soil going down the reservoir. You could also line your wicks with that too. So you could get a little bit of that material, whatever it is, whether you use weed matting or geofabric or old clothes, and you line your wick with that, and then you put your soil in that, and then that will also stop soil from getting into the reservoir layer. How far into the top section should your wick go? Generally about 10 centimeters at least should go in. Another question, what did you make your sieve out of? Well, I just had some timber that I had lying around and just chicken wire. That's all it is. I just nailed the chicken wire onto the timber frame, and that's the sieve. Another one, does your wick in the bottom section actually rest on the bottom of the container? Yes, it does. So the wicks just sit them right on the bottom of the container, and then you fill it up around it with your rocks or scoria or whatever else you're going to use. And yeah, they sit right on the bottom, but make sure they go up into the soil layer. Okay, so I think that's the end of the questions. So yeah, as I mentioned, this is being recorded, so I'll go on the City of Mount Gambier YouTube channel in the near future. And if you have any further questions, excuse me, if you have any further questions later on, you can always email me through city@mountgambier.sa.gov.au, and I'll try and answer them through that medium. But yeah, we've got another webinar happening in a fortnight's time, all about recycling. So if you've got some things that you're not sure if you can recycle them or not, then come along to that and you can ask your questions and see if you can recycle it. But thank you very much for attending, and I hope you learnt something useful about wicking boxes. So get out there and give it a go, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised, particularly when summer comes around.